I went to Ontario College York for about 4 minutes. I was filling my oats then, and I decided to hell with all this. I'm getting out of Toronto. I remember taking off, heading north of here to the 401 that had just recently been built, and deciding I was going to hitchhike to Vancouver. A car stopped. The guy said, I'm going to Tampa, Florida. I said, I'm with you. Tampa, Florida, I got a job in a car wash briefly because I paid cash. Then hitchhiking over to New Orleans. From there, catching a lift with a guy sleeping in a bathtub in New Orleans for a while. I guess I'd read too much Jack Kerouac or something like that. It was a wonderful, magic time.
I think probably having discovered how to draw and how to draw well, I turned into a drawing fool for a little while. I was a little like the troubadour hitchhiking around while I was drawing. That was the big difference. And drew 3,000 drawings over a period of a couple of years while hitchhiking all over North America.
I can remember even being in New Orleans and being dead broke, but being absolutely just reveling in the fact that I was broke, but managing to survive, managing to get by, you know, on a couple of bucks, stretching canvases in an art gallery, and also drinking far too much. But back then, the body could bounce, you know? It could bounce right back. Even reveling in the hangovers, for God's sake. That same leg of the journey, I ended up in San Francisco. Somebody picked me up hitchhiking, took me to a dinner party. I sold a bunch of drawings, and suddenly I had enough money to get a nice little hotel room for a couple of nights. So it was truly an adventure. I also got laid in San Francisco. So San Francisco was one of the highlights, and for a guy hitchhiking around, that's kind of important.
There were sort of tough moments when you couldn't get rides, being arrested a few times and that sort of thing, but that was all good. All good in the sense that that was all part of the experience, and then you could have a few beers and tell stories when you got home. It was all good.
When Terry Mosher, former high school dropout and semi-delinquent, finally got back from his travels, his drawing proficiency helped him to graduate with honors from art college in Quebec City. He also started a family here with his first wife, Carol, and had 2 daughters during a relationship which would last 30 years. Terry began making a living by teaming up with some local artists who wanted to work outside in the heart of the old town.
Suddenly, what do you know, we had a little business going on here, 4 or 5 of us, selling the occasional drawing, painting, whatever happened to be to tourists. And the art galleries in the area began to take notice of this, and they felt, well, this is unfair to merchants. These so-called artists are taking money away from us. How ironic is that? And so they called the cops, and the cops came and got us and arrested us. And so there was this little trial and so on that went on, and we appeared in the newspapers and suddenly got all this wonderful publicity.
The merchants eventually relented, and Rue du Trésor became one of the town's biggest attractions. Quebec street artists today take credit cards and seem a little better equipped than in Terry's time.
He's got quite the setup there. If it rained or got real cold, we'd just go to the tavern in the old days.
That would be the Chien d'Or, now an art gallery, but formerly a popular bar for journalists, artists, and the odd law student.
I used to come over here after a day's work, or if I just decided to take the afternoon off and drink some beer and talk to all kinds of people. And occasionally a guy used to pop in, and he was studying at Laval. A very sort of confident guy, Irish guy. We'd pop a few and so on. It was Brian Mulroney. Who would know that Brian Mulroney and I would eventually cross swords, him as Prime Minister of Canada and me as a cartoonist.
It was while doing portraits of tourists here that Terry made a fateful change to his signature, which would mark his drawings for life.
Well, I had been signing the Mosher, but I was working here on the street, and my first daughter, Aislin, was born, and I was studying at art school, and I thought, well, I don't want to confuse the cartoons with my serious paintings, so just as a joke, I began signing the caricatures with the name Aislin. And what do you know? I ended up taking the cartooning seriously and forgot all about the painting.
While finishing his degree at art college, Terry gradually dropped his romantic notions of becoming a great painter in favor of earning a living as an editorial page cartoonist.
I looked at political cartoonists then, like Duncan McPherson, who was King Kong of political cartooning, as just wonderful talents, and I would look at it occasionally, but I thought, I have no political sense, so I couldn't possibly do that. It was only when I got into the business I discovered that they didn't have it either. And that's what made them successful. They had no comprehension of politics. It puzzled them, and they could express this in the cartoons, and so people could relate to it.
With Trudeau-mania breaking out across Canada, Terry waded into political cartooning, freelancing for a while before being hired by the Montreal Star.
Trudeau came along when I was still drawing caricatures in Quebec City. I thought, boy, this guy's interesting. We had had Lester Pearsons and John Diefenbakers and Louis Samarans, and who is this guy? So it was a wonderful, wonderful time to start out. There was all of this excitement in the air about Canadian politics. Who knew that he could be such a tough, determined individual? We discovered that during the October crisis. He was a steely, steely guy. Up until that point, we thought, well, interesting, but maybe just a bit of a flake, you know, the flower power and stuff like that.
The rise of separatist leader René Lévesque and his epic battles with Pierre Trudeau over the destiny of Canada kicked Terry's career into overdrive.
This guy made me a lot of money. 76 and all the other Anglos are freaking out. I tripled my income. Everybody in the world wanted cartoons on Quebec, you know. Awful statue. He was, I suppose, for my audience, the enemy in a way, but such a likable enemy. What didn't I like about his face? I mean, every aspect of it, the comb-over hair, the nose, the expressions of the shrugs, the hands, the cigarettes, constant, you know, I would have cigarettes coming out of every orifice in the man.
English Montreal was going through traumatic times, and Terry was one of the elements that made this community feel that it was still a community, and it was a good community, and it had brilliant people in it.
English Quebecers never needed Terry's sense of humor more than during the fateful provincial election of 1976. The Parti Québécois' bid for power set the artist up for a cartoon which would become folklore.
The few days before, there was sort of a nervousness in the air about, my God, you know, the PQ might actually win. I had drawn two heads in advance. I had drawn a Lévesque head with a kind of a neutral look, and a Bourassa head with a kind of neutral, both sort of looking out. And I went into the Gazette. I rarely sit with the editorial page writers, but just to watch the results I did. And the results began pouring in, and I looked around the room, and you know, the faces were white. It was pretty obvious, very, very early, that the PQ were going to win this thing. And this is the English establishment newspaper in Montreal, and the faces are like, this is where it came from. I thought, boy, everybody here could use a volume. I went to my studio, which was just down the hall, and added bodies to Lévesque pointing out, saying, okay, everybody take a volume. Took it to the composing room. I knew it was a pretty good cartoon, but I had no idea. People wanted some sort of steam valve, and just the reaction was stunning to this cartoon. Never had anything like it since. I met him a couple of times, and he actually really had quite an extraordinarily good sense of humor. And as a joke, I gave him a 10 milligram Valium, and he happened to be drinking a glass of scotch. And qu'est-ce que c'est ça? J'ai dit, c'est un Valium, Monsieur Lévesque. And he took it, he popped it. Well, his speech died that night, and I take full credit.